She was cinema's golden princess, raised in luxury. He was a street-hardened rebel who had once lived with prostitutes just to have a roof over his head. Their love story would become one of the most passionate and devastating romances in film history. Their backgrounds couldn't have been more different. Romy Schneider was born into a prestigious acting dynasty and became the beloved darling of German and Austrian cinema as the star of the Sissi film series, where she played the young Empress Elizabeth of Austria. Alain Delon, in contrast, grew up under the harsh rule of his stepfather, a butcher who forced the 10-year-old boy into a cage with aggressive dogs. Gun in hand, he demanded the boy feed them. A man must not be a coward, his stepfather had said. Those brutal lessons in survival would shape Delon for life, making him both dangerously charismatic and emotionally guarded. Part 1. First Impressions. In 1958, fate brought them together on the set of Christine. The meeting was anything but romantic. Delon had been told he'd be starring alongside a charming co-star. Romy was promised a promising young talent. But Delon had no idea of Romy's immense fame across the Rhine. For years, she had been Austria and Germany's sweetheart, so adored that she later lamented, "People looked at me like a Viennese pastry. Everyone wanted a taste." She had grown tired of playing the same sweet, innocent roles and was eager to prove herself in a more serious project. Her mother, Magda Schneider, strongly objected. "Who is this unknown Delon?" she scoffed. The rest of Romy's family was equally horrified. Why risk your career for a French nobody? But for the first time, Romy rebelled. She was legally an adult, and this was her decision. With that, she boarded a plane to Paris, unknowingly stepping into the most defining chapter of her life. At Orly Airport, Delon greeted her with a carefully staged gift, a bouquet of white roses, orchestrated by the film's producer. It was meant to be a charming gesture, but Delon had little idea what role this little German girl would come to play in his life. What was immediately clear, however, was that their paychecks weren't equal. Romy would earn a staggering 75 million francs, while Delon and co-star Jean-Claude Brialy would each receive a mere 300,000. Not bad for a newcomer, until he compared it to hers. Despite what legend suggests, their connection wasn't instant. In fact, Romy's first impression was irritation. "I saw this young guy, much too handsome, much too polished, much better dressed than I would have liked," she later recalled. His good looks put her on edge, as if she instinctively knew how dangerously charming he could be. She had experienced love before, including a serious relationship with Horst Buchholz, but something about Delon unsettled her. It felt different. She bristled. She put up walls. Delon, on the other hand, was unfazed. He knew his worth. He approached his co-star with exaggerated politeness, and that irritated her even more. The tension between them crackled immediately. He arrived late to set, fresh from joyriding in his new car, barely prepared for scenes. She lectured him about German professionalism through an interpreter, only to be met with his amused smirks. By then, Delon had already appeared in 3 films and held his achievements in high regard. Only their co-star, Jean-Claude Brialy, ever observant, noticed what was really happening. Romy would glance around when Delon stepped away, looking subtly restless, as if she already missed him. The hostility between them was a facade. No one could have predicted how their differences would both ignite their love and ultimately tear them apart. Their story wasn't a simple Cinderella tale. It was the opposite. This time, it was the streetwise prince who would eventually leave his princess with nothing but a peculiar final gift and a broken heart. But that ending was still far away. First, there would be passion, defiance, and a love that neither of them could control. Part 2, Falling in Love. Their hostility didn't last long. Away from the scrutiny of the German press and her controlling family, Romy began to see a different side of Alain. The shift started during a trip to Brussels, where the walls between them began to crack. But it was during location shooting in Vienna that everything changed. Here, in her home territory, Romy became Alain's guide, showing him her world. The woman who had once scolded him for being unprofessional now wandered Vienna's ancient streets by his side, drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. Magda Schneider watched in horror as her carefully curated daughter transformed before her eyes. "You're throwing yourself at him," she scolded, wielding shame like a weapon. But this time, Romy didn't back down. For the first time in her life, the obedient daughter refused to listen. When filming ended and Alain returned to Paris, Romy made a bold decision, one that would alter the course of her life forever. She booked a ticket to Paris and moved in with him on Rue de Messine. It wasn't just an act of love, it was a declaration of independence. The sheltered German princess had chosen a man her family considered beneath her. The Schneider-Reddy dynasty, pillars of German high society, were appalled. How could their beloved Rosemary live in sin with a Frenchman, an actor, no less? Realizing that opposition only pushed their daughter further away, Romy's family tried a different approach. Without consulting her, they began corresponding directly with Delon, emphasizing how his relationship with Romy was compromising her reputation. To their surprise, Alain agreed to an engagement. He arrived unexpectedly at their Swiss estate in Lugano, where they had arranged a grand engagement announcement, complete with press coverage. But when Romy saw what was happening, she was furious. "We had talked about engagement," she later wrote, "but never about marriage. Alain was already my husband, and I was his wife. We didn't need any documents." Despite the public display of commitment, cracks in their relationship were beginning to show. Rather than bringing them closer, their shared professions started pulling them apart. Alain's career was skyrocketing. At industry events, producers and reporters swarmed him, while Romy, once the queen of German cinema, stood quietly at his side, reduced to being Delon's fiancée. She had left behind a thriving career for love, but in Paris, she was struggling to find her place. Alain, consumed by his own success, failed to see what she was going through. Years later, he would reflect on their relationship with brutal honesty. "Romy belonged to the class I hated most in the world. How could I, in such a short time, free her from the views that had been force-fed to her for 20 years? There were two Romys. One I loved more than anything in the world. The other I hated just as passionately." Looking back, the older Delon would acknowledge the unfairness of those words. By then, he had become the very bourgeois he once despised. But at the time, he saw Romy's world as something to rebel against, not something to protect. Tension escalated. They argued frequently. Alain, blinded by his ambitions, didn't see how much Romy was sacrificing for their love. She, in turn, felt increasingly lost in his shadow. Then, just as their relationship seemed at its breaking point, an unexpected figure entered their lives, the legendary director Luchino Visconti. His arrival would give them one last chance to bridge the growing divide between them. But would it be enough? Part 3. Love on Stage. At first, Luchino Visconti wasn't impressed with Romy. He saw her only as a distraction to his new protégé, Alain Delon. The whispers spreading through Paris didn't help. Rumors, including accusations from Romy's own mother, suggested that Delon was leading a double life. Years later, Magda Schneider would even repeat these claims in an interview with Bild magazine. For Romy, the implications were unbearable. But Visconti, a master of human psychology, watched her closely. He saw how she suffered in silence, how her beauty concealed an emotional intensity that few directors had dared to explore. And then, something shifted. Her raw talent, her fierce determination, won him over. In what seemed like either an act of wisdom or cruelty, he made a daring decision. He would cast them together in "'Tis Pity She's a Whore," a play about doomed, forbidden love. Written by John Ford, a contemporary of Shakespeare, the play told the story of an incestuous relationship between a brother and sister. It was a tale of passion, defiance, and destruction, an unsettling mirror of the real-life romance between Romy and Delon. "This will be suicide," Romy kept repeating. She had never performed on stage before, and her French was far from perfect. Delon, too, had no theater experience. But Visconti knew exactly how to manipulate them both. "Are you really going to chicken out?" he taunted Romy, knowing she could never resist a challenge. Rehearsals were grueling. Visconti spared no expense. He designed the sets himself, commissioned costumes from Piero Tosi, and had Nino Rota compose the music. But he was ruthless with his young stars, pushing them beyond their limits. He understood that their real emotions, love, frustration, resentment, could fuel their performances, and he exploited this mercilessly. Their characters' lines felt eerily personal. For each of your glances, I am ready to return 10. For each of your tears, I will pay with 20 of my own, Romy would say as Annabella. Come then, after so many tears shed, we must learn to smile, to love each other, Delon would respond as Giovanni. Their love and conflict spilled onto the stage, blurring the line between acting and reality. Romy documented her struggle in her memoir, I Am Romy, Diary of a Life, recalling the relentless pressure of rehearsals, her battle with stage fright, and Visconti's unshakable faith in her. But just before the premiere, disaster struck. Romy was rushed to the hospital with appendicitis. Everyone expected the production to be canceled. Instead, 2 weeks later, she returned to the stage, bandaged but determined. Opening night was brutal. Critics were merciless. The renowned Soviet director Sergei Yutkovich was particularly scathing. Romy Schneider shyly but sweetly babbled her text like a diligent student at a drama school exam, while Delon barely squeezed out his words, dripping with sweat. Together, they presented a pitiful sight. The audience booed. The show was a failure. But Yutkovich never saw what the production would become. Over the course of 120 performances, something remarkable happened. Romy and Delon grew into their roles, their chemistry sharpening with every show. Even the famously harsh French press began to recognize their transformation. For Romy, the stage became a second home. Her theatrical heritage, once a burden, became her strength. Her French improved, her confidence soared. Visconti saw what others had failed to. Beneath the fragile, doll-like exterior was an actress of extraordinary depth. For Alain Delon, the journey was harder. He struggled to adjust, haunted by his own insecurities. Years later, in famous love affairs, he would still recall his trembling chicken calves in period costume. But under Visconti's guidance, he pushed through. On stage, Romy was at home, he later reflected. I came there from the army and my stepfather's butcher shop, but Visconti was there beside us. For a month, we rehearsed Italian style, sitting at a table, reading the play. He conducted us, gave us directions, suggested intonations. He knew how to get what he wanted from actors. Romy and I were very much in love then. Playing with someone you love is completely different. There's no need to force anything. I seemed to integrate into that world, but I still felt I was lacking so many things. Their triumph on stage became their last perfect moment together. As the curtain fell on their final performance, they were still in love, still together. But something had shifted. The play had forced them to confront their differences in ways they could no longer ignore. Their worlds had collided beautifully on stage, but reality was waiting in the wings. Hollywood was calling Romy's name. Delon's star was rising in French cinema. Their paths were beginning to diverge, though neither of them wanted to admit it yet. The end was coming, but it would arrive in a way that would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. Part 4, The Final Goodbye. For Romy, her triumph on stage with Visconti opened new doors. She would go on to work with him in Il Lavoro, Boccaccio 70, and later Ludwig. But when Visconti learned of her breakup with Alain in 1963, he didn't hide his disappointment. He had seen something rare in them, a fusion of raw talent and genuine passion that could have transformed European theater. But fate, or perhaps their own natures, had other plans. That year, Romy left for Hollywood. Their last moment together played out like a cruel reflection of their first meeting 5 years earlier. Only this time, there were no white roses. No warm welcome, just an empty space between them. Upon returning to Paris, Schneider found their apartment empty, with a bouquet of 40 black roses and Delon's note. We were wedded without having married. Our profession, one where we only see each other in passing, at airports, leaves us no chance to survive. I give you back your freedom, but I will keep your heart. The black roses cast a long shadow over everything that followed. Romy later admitted that she felt cursed. She married, but happiness proved elusive. Her beloved son died tragically at 14, impaled on a spiked fence in a freak accident. Her first husband committed suicide. After a severe kidney operation, she turned to alcohol and tranquilizers, numbing herself against the pain that never seemed to fade. When her second ex-husband, Daniel Biasini, took her daughter Sarah away, it felt like the final cruel twist of fate. On May 29, 1982, Romy Schneider's heart simply stopped. No farewell letter, no final words, just silence. Alain Delon's reaction was immediate. In Paris Match, he wrote a kind of confession, one that revealed as much about himself as it did about her. You were an untamed but complete being. How can one explain what you were, what we actors are? By playing people unlike ourselves, we lose control. To withstand this, you need strength of character and inner balance. But how can you find it in our world of circus tightrope walkers, clowns, and acrobats, where the spotlight blinds us with its gilded light of fame? You said you understood nothing about life, but knew how to do everything in cinema. No, others can't understand us. The more successful an actor becomes, the more unhappy they are. Look at Garbo, Monroe, Hayworth. And you, it's a terrible profession for a woman. I say this as a man and as an actor who knew and understood you better than anyone else. He still called her Puppele, a cute term derived from the adapted German pet name Puppelchen, little doll. He believed he understood her better than anyone, but perhaps he was wrong. If he had truly understood her, would he have sent those black roses? Much remains unspoken between men and women, even until the end of their days. Perhaps Romy demanded too much from him. Perhaps she reminded him too often of his lack of education. But one thing is certain, Delon played a part in breaking her heart. In later years, he would come to understand that. In 1996, while performing Enigma Variations, he kept one item hanging in his dressing room, a brocade dress. The same one Romy had worn on stage in 'Tis Pity She's a Whore. Maybe it was sentimentality, maybe it was something deeper. But one thing is certain, he never forgot her. She lived on, not just in cinema, but in the depths of his conscience, a constant reminder of what he had lost. The weight of that responsibility would haunt him for the rest of his life, as revealed in his farewell letter, one we've already quoted, but one that now feels more important than ever to remember. In it, Delon grappled with the consequences of bringing Romy to France, pulling her away from her family and homeland despite all their hatred. He understood how that decision had shaped both her triumphs and her struggles. It wasn't guilt exactly, but something just as heavy, a deep awareness that his actions, though born of love, had changed the course of her life forever. As he put it most poignantly, "Because of me, it was in Paris that your heart stopped beating that night." Their love story remains one of cinema's greatest tragedies, a tale of two people who found in each other both salvation and destruction. The street-hardened rebel and the golden princess created something unforgettable, but perhaps it was always too intense, too fragile to last. In the end, it wasn't just their careers or backgrounds that separated them. It was the very passion that had once bound them together. To fully grasp the depth of Delon's feelings for Romy, we'll be sharing his complete farewell letter in our next video. Do you think their love story could have ended differently? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating stories of classic cinema history.